7. Our next session is sponsored by Protiviti, which is also the platinum sponsor of the conference. During this session, Abdullah Al-Anizi, who is the Group Chief Audit Executive of Saudi Telecom, and Amit Ray, who is the Managing Director and Solution Leader, Data Analytics and Digital Transformation at Protiviti, as they will discuss implementing a sustainable continuous controls monitoring solution. It is a case study of a large telecommunication group. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Abdullah Al-Anizi and Amit Ray.
So thank you very much, Samia, for the very nice introduction. Good morning to everyone who's taking time out this morning to attend the session today. We are very pleased and always happy to be back at the CAE Conference. This is my 5th time speaking. This time it's a little different. Obviously, it's a bummer that I don't get the opportunity to interact with a lot of you in person. But nevertheless, this has been our way of life for the last, obviously, about 9 odd months. So, without further ado, and also, I'm humbled and privileged and honored to be accompanied and sharing the same platform with Mr. Abdullah Al-Nazir, who is a very well-respected member in the internal audit fraternity, very well-known, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He leads the internal audit function at Saudi Telecommunications Company, with one of the largest internal audit functions in the region. So I think the topic this morning is our story with Saudi Telecommunications Company and our journey together as we implemented a continuous controls monitoring solution. And instead of talking theories, we felt that it would be good to share a client story, and that's why we took this approach. But before we get into what continuous controls monitoring is all about and why we need to look at that as an option, I wanted to set a little bit of a context, right? And a little bit of background as to how next gen of internal audit may look like. With 2020 almost in the rearview mirror, and what a year it has been, right, for all of us. And I think none of us can claim to have been untouched with the events that have been unfolding around us, with our families, with our friends, with our workplace, entertainment, school, globally. Everybody has been touched in one way or the other. And hence the 2021 Audit Committee agenda is also shaping up very differently than in the years of the past. Top of the list is ensuring companies are resilient and agile enough to withstand whatever surprises the next 12 months may have in store. If necessity is the mother of invention, COVID-19 forced many around the world to rethink our daily lives, from work to school to entertainment. It has been imperative to digitally transform every aspect of our lives to be able to operate with some semblance of normalcy. On the same vein, if we look at what's happening in organizations around us, organizations that have been able to adapt, evolve, and transform and rethink their business model through leveraging digital, through leveraging data, by fast tracking digital transformation, has been ahead of their competition. Now, businesses get disrupted as they embrace innovation economy, which in turn is challenging the internal audit functions to stay relevant. Now, internal audit needs to respond to these organizational changes in order to ensure that it can help manage risk and add value and stay relevant in this new paradigm. As you ponder upon the questions that's outlined in this slide, the risk of inaction for internal audit today is much higher than ever before, right? So we are faced with two choices essentially: either disrupt or be disrupted. Now, if you reflect on the questions here, I mean, it doesn't only talk about leveraging technology or leveraging data. It also touches upon the aspects of people, governance, and methodology, and the need to challenge the status quo in all of those dimensions. So at Protiviti, when we look at next gen of internal audit, we don't like to lead with technology. And that's oftentimes the temptation, to pick up some shiny tools in the market and feel that they will somehow create magic for us and change the way we do things. But unfortunately, that's not how it happens, right? So when we look at transforming your internal audit function and enabling it with emerging tech and making it ready to kind of look at the new and emerging risks, we need to look at governance, we need to look at methodology, as well as we need to look at enabling technology, and specifically in that order. So when we talk about governance, what essentially we are talking about is how do we embed innovation and design thinking as a way of life? How do we embed an agile mindset? How do we convert a traditionally risk averse sort of a mindset into something that's not afraid to embrace failure, right? And that's becoming more and more important. What are the skill sets of the auditors of the future, right? Now, typically, certain skill sets that were considered as technical will become more and more core and mainstream as we go forward. And as we try to bring in new talents and new sort of skills within the internal audit function, it will be imperative to look at flexible staffing models. It will be imperative to look at how do you rotate, staff from the business within the internal audit team and vice versa, right? So those are some of the aspects, excuse me, around governance. Now, with regards to methodology, internal audit has been doing the same things for several years in almost the same way. Now, if I take an example of risk assessment, a traditional approach to risk assessment is a point in time risk assessment. Now, given the dynamic nature of the business and the disruptions that we see around us, a point in time risk assessment at the beginning of the year may not be an appropriate approach in all the cases. A dynamic risk assessment allows you the flexibility to reassess and reevaluate your risks as you move through the year and recalibrate your plan and focus accordingly. An agile audit approach allows you to embed agile framework as opposed to a waterfall model that traditionally all audit projects tend to follow. And agile has been doing wonders in the technology field. It's time for internal audit to embrace and see the benefits of that as well. The basic fundamental of agile is how do you look at short sprints, look at quick wins instead of one big project, right? Now, if I look at high impact reporting as another area, right, in today's fast moving environment, timely communication of quality and actionable information is key. Long narrative based reporting, which was traditionally the forte within internal audit, needs to be re examined. A lot of the innovative internal audit functions that we are talking to and working with have started delivering reports and in terms of interactive graphic rich formats to deliver maximum impact through user intuitive dashboards, content that can be visualized on various sorts of mobile devices, and so on and so forth. And obviously, continuous monitoring allows us to be more proactive and more real time in the way we assess, monitor, and mitigate risks. And we'll talk a lot about it during the course of this presentation. And as we move on to the enabling technology, to kind of reiterate my first point, that should be a means to an end. That should be a means to serve your methodology changes and your governance changes, not the other way around, right? The key thing is how do you leverage enterprise data across the board for everything that you do? How do you leverage automation to kind of look at the non-value adding tactical repetitive tasks that oftentimes internal auditors get sucked into, whereby not being able to focus on more strategic and value adding tasks, right? And that's the role automation and data can play. However, technology cannot be just dropped into your old way of doing things, and that doesn't help, because that will only give you an impression that we are trying to change things, whereas fundamentally we haven't, right? Now, what does that mean? If you look at this slide, what we try to do here is we try to look at how does a day in the life of an internal auditor looks like, right? And what are the different kinds of tasks or activities an internal audit team member would be doing on a day-to-day basis. So you would be either focusing on assessing risks within the enterprise or planning, or you would be focused on working with the management and the stakeholders to understand the processes, or you would be actually conducting the field work of the controls testing, and finally reporting and follow-up. Now, if you look at some of the examples mentioned here, they talk about various possible use cases and applications of technology and emerging digital tools that can help you do each of these things better, smarter, and faster. Now, one doesn't have to try all of it, right? But you have a plethora of opportunities available to make everything that you do more efficient, right? Just to take a few examples in the interest of time, if you look at risk assessment, obviously, some organizations have been data driven for several years now, while others still base it on subjective workshops and interviews. A good way to look at how do you use past historical data from your own audit reports, from the past risks in the risk registers, from the observations of the past years, is a good way to look at how do you prioritize the future. We have looked at organizations like telecommunications, banking, retail, which are inherently data rich, including energy and utilities sector as well. Uh, a lot of the internal audit functions often tend to look at huge volumes of data to look at different business units, or let's say in cases of banks, different branches, for example, or different stores in the cases of a retail organization. And this high level assessment based on data gives them some telltale indicators of which ones to pick up for audit, right? And here you are trying to identify risks based on data, not based on subjective or qualitative assessment. Social intelligence is another area that's picking up quite fast, whereby you can gather unstructured data that's available in the social media, right? And when we talk about social media, it doesn't necessarily have to be the internet. It could be your intranet as well. It could be looking at how your employees or suppliers or vendors are talking to each other or customers. How are they giving you feedback? And taking some of those inputs, and there are tools available that can make sense of this unstructured data that's available all around us in various applications in various forms. Mind you, most of these do not reside in your traditional IT systems. However, there are tools and technologies that can make this data available for you to assess risks. Now, if you go to planning and sample selection, obviously there's a lot of different methods, both statistical and analytical, that can help you apply sampling in a more scientific way. If you're dealing with physical documentation, optical character recognition techniques or intelligent document processing techniques have evolved to an extent that you can digitize a lot of information that typically would have to be otherwise manually reviewed. If you look at process walkthrough, and this is where a lot of innovation is happening within the internal audit space, within the emerging tech space, instead of depending on a process owner or an outdated document to understand the process, there are tools available today that can collect the digital footprints of every process from your core IT systems like your ERP, your CRM, your core operational systems, and rebuild the process narrative for you. And that's what process finding is all about. If you're an organization that deals with a lot of voice communication with your customers, for example, like in a banking sector or a telecommunications sector, there are voice analytics tools that help you assess and analyze all conversations as compared to looking at specific samples. Virtual inspection or drone-based technologies have been now being used for inventory, for physical inspection, especially in real estate and construction areas, and it has made lives a lot simpler. Imagine an auditor having to go and do a physical inspection in the middle of the desert at 50 degrees centigrade, right? Today, you can send a drone, take a video and images, and analyze that in the back office for health and safety requirements, for structural integrity requirements, for other compliance and process deviations of requirements. Controls testing, again, this is where a lot of action is happening on the ground, and a lot of the organizations that we see who have started innovating and applying emerging tech in their day to day starts here, right? Because some of these are quick wins, right? We'll talk a lot about how we use continuous monitoring and data analytics to do what you do faster, better, smarter, right? Robotic process automation is another area that has been picking up, especially to automate a lot of the tactical, repetitive processes that does not necessarily need subjective judgment or intelligence, right? And finally, on reporting and follow-up, obviously, there's a trend to move towards more interactive, graphically rich, multimedia-based reporting, like dashboards, interactive workflows, as opposed to static, long narrative reporting like we talked about. There are developments happening in the natural language processing based report writing as well, where you know uh, machine learning or AI can actually, based on the outcomes of analytics, can phrase the first set of observation for you, right? These are not perfect still, but a lot is happening in this field, and something to look out for. And if you're wondering why we have titled the slide Internal Audit 4.0, and a lot of you would be familiar with the Industry 4.0 revolution, and the way we would like to think of it is, while Industry 4.0 is revolutionizing every aspect of the business, no matter which industry you are a part of, there is no reason why some of those tools and technologies cannot be embraced and imbibed within the internal audit practice as well, right? Now, this is kind of a very broad overview of how do we see next gen audit, and this one focuses a little bit more on the enabling technologies bit. Now let's zoom in a little bit further on continuous monitoring and try to understand what continuous controls monitoring is all about. When we talk about continuous controls monitoring, or CCM, the way we abbreviate it, we essentially are talking about how do we automate the data extraction, cleansing from multiple structured and unstructured data sources. Today, as auditors, even if you have tools and even if you have the skill sets to do analytics, oftentimes we struggle to get the right source of information in time, complete, accurate, quality, something that you can rely on. And oftentimes you go back and forth with your IT and process teams to get the right information. And by the time you are able to massage it, cleanse it, find anything meaningful out of it, you've spent a sufficient amount of your audit budget already, right? So the time that you actually end up spending doing root cause investigation and analysis is actually far lesser than the time we end up spending in collecting, managing, and accessing data. Now, one of the greatest advantages of having continuous controls monitoring in place is all of this can be automated, right? Yes, there is some heavy lifting to start with, to set up the connections, to set up the operating procedures with your technology teams. But once that is done, it's a one-time investment, right? And then you have access to all the data all the time. Now, once you have the data, the next step is to apply business rules on the extracted data, right? To detect exceptions, anomalies, outliers. And these business rules typically would be flexible so that as your processes change, you're able to update, upgrade, and change the business rules as you go on. And then once you've looked at the initial set of exceptions, you would find there are false positives, right? And then you would need to apply analytical methods, AI or machine learning, including human input, which is what we call supervised learning, right? An experienced auditor would find the false positives and feed it back into the system so that over a period of time, the rules become more and more intelligent. And then you start publishing alerts and exceptions in user-friendly, intuitive graphic dashboards. And finally, those dashboards, along with the various other features that are typically available in such tools, will allow you to drill down, do root cause investigation, and potentially unlock value and drive action within the business, right? Now, why should you consider doing all of this? The benefits are quite obvious, right? So one is obviously you would like to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the function, right? So you want to do more with less, and that's the mantra essentially these days. Obviously, the second aspect is increase the depth and the breadth of coverage, right? So instead of doing a check once a year or once every 2 years, now you can run the high risk checks every month, if you like, every quarter, every fortnight, depending on what's your risk appetite, right? And that also means that you're detecting risks proactively on a continuous basis, which means that the time that you have to fix an issue uh, is a lot more today, right? Finding something after the fact when it's too late doesn't really add a lot of value to the business. But if you're able to find issues or early warning indicators in time for you to be able to go and make a difference to your customer, to your supplier, to your vendor, to your internal operations, that adds a lot of value, right? And finally, this is one of my favorites, right? So when you apply analytics, you tend to discover a lot of unknown unknowns. Now, what do I mean by that? Typically, as internal auditors, we tend to kind of work based on RCMs and work programs, right? So the fundamental premise there is we know what can go wrong, right? But if you look at some of the major issues that we oftentimes come across, we never expected them to happen, right? So it's important, while it's important to look at the aspects that we know could go wrong, it's also important to have tools and techniques that can give you indicators of things that you're not even looking for, right? Various analytical methods and techniques allow you to discover those unknown unknowns. So that's probably, as you mature in the CCM journey, this is one of the aspects that really helps you create a differentiation in how you conduct your internal audit. So with that, I would kind of hand over to Mr. Abdullah, and as Protiviti, as a firm, we have been fortunate to work with Saudi Telecommunications Company for more than a decade. Our journey of continuous controls monitoring, started about 5 years back, and I don't want to steal the thunder, so I'll let Abdullah talk about the story a little bit, and we'll be happy to take questions at the end. Abdullah, over to you.
Thank you, Amit. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning to everyone. It's an honor speaking to you today. Uh, when I took over as STC Group Chief Audit Executive 5.5 years ago, I had an ambition to implement continuous control monitoring system. It was part of a big transformation program with the 3 pillars. The first one was to acquire and retain talent, which is I am blessed and privileged to have an A team of internal auditors. The second is to be more of a strategic focus rather than operational. The third is to use the use of technologies and systems, which is resulted in implementing CCM. In this case study, we will show you the beginning, the infrastructure, how we selected the areas, built the team, the challenges and lessons learned. First, I will start with our vision and mission and also strategy. So we had a vision to become a world-class internal audit function aligned with international standard and best practices to assist STC Group in achieving its objectives. Our mission statement is to protect and enhance STC Group value by providing risk-based and objective assurance, advice, and insight. The second slide, please. Yes, this is our strategy. We came up with this acronym value. So as an internal audit, we add value to all stakeholders, to the business, to the board, and also we visualize, analyze, automate audit operations. We leverage advanced analytics, tools, and technologies, upskill and inject new talent to keep pace with STC, expand scale and scope. Next slide, please. So when we started looking at into CCM, we have prepared a 3 years implementation roadmap. We have prepared the required infrastructure with all required tools and software to extract the data from multiple resources and then analyze this data. Also, the tools required to disseminate information to users in a user-friendly dashboard. In the beginning of the project, we looked into past audit observation, the risks that are materialized. We have also identified areas and prioritized them based on their first criticality, data availability, and process maturity. We initially started with 2 areas, procure to pay and HR and payroll. The reason we have selected these 2 areas because both areas are transaction heavy with clear policies and standards, and also we can repeat this process in periodically. Also, both areas can give us specific financial benefits, and also all exceptions found can be addressed immediately. Our message here is that we did not jump without a clear plan, and we knew from the beginning it is a journey. So all stakeholders, we involve them and should to understand and realize the value and also get them familiarized with the concept so they can start using the system. Next slide, please. So after we completed the pilot and we saw the benefits with all stakeholders, we started in the pilot with the support functions. Then we moved to phase two. In phase two, what we did, we looked into the core of business and also finance modules with a much more holistic view. In phase two, we have identified 8 areas, as I mentioned in the previous slide, based on their criticality, data availability, and process maturity. And I remember when we came up with these 8 areas, we had a workshop, 3 hours workshop with my team, all directors, all team leaders, and we said, what are the most critical areas? And also provided that the data is available, the process is mature, and there are clear business rules. So we have selected areas related to customers, customer information assurance, credit control, customer adjustments, in addition to finance areas, which is general ledger, fixed assets, revenue recognition, and inventory, as well as one area related to system rules, which is segregation of duties. And the message, I will not go into details of each area. However, I will highlight 2 areas. One is the general ledger, which helped us a lot in the financial statement review to analyze trends and variances quickly. So initially in the past, if there is any variance in any number, in any account, we spend hours to identify what is the reason behind this variance. Now, with the help of CCM, it's a matter of clicks, and then we can know exactly what is the reason of behind this variance. Also, in the segregation of duties, we looked into more than 1,500 rules across ERP modules, and that could not be done without CCM. It's a huge manual work. With the help of CCM, it can be done with the click and also periodically, as I said. In the next slide is about the CCM implementation approach with Amit.
Thank you. Thanks, Abdullah, for passing this on. So a little bit about, and Abdullah did mention most of it already, but just to kind of summarize that, what is the approach that we took as we went through this journey? And it was very important for us to make sure that we spend the time and effort to plan and assess the maturity of the systems, of data, of existing technology infrastructure. We also spent a lot of time looking at past audit reports, talking to the existing internal audit team who were auditing those areas, and the outcome of which was a clearly laid out plan with very specific rationale as to what we would take in wave one, what we would take in wave two, and how do we kind of scale it up, right? And that's the first stage, which is what we're calling in readiness and maturity assessment. Oftentimes we see organizations jump into kind of CCM or analytics without a proper plan, right? Now, if we pick up an area that does not have the good quality of data, or we would struggle to access the data, or completeness or accuracy of the information is of concern, or the process is evolving, right? It's not stable, it's not mature, it's an area of the business that's less understood, we are setting ourselves for failure. So it was very important for us when we started this journey to pick up areas so that we can show quick wins, we can actually show impact and value to the business, because it was not just about the internal audit function driving and supporting this. And we were fortunate that everybody, including the audit committee, was backing it. But the challenge that we also had was to ensure that the business and the process owners see value in the outcomes from this, right? So we spent a lot of time with all the stakeholders, securing the buy-in, understanding what would be the right areas to pick up. Once we did that, the next step was to kind of roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty into the actual systems, right? Now, understanding the CRM, understanding the ERP, understanding the billing system, how the data is structured, what should be the specific business rules. And this is where we did a series of workshops and back and forth with the process, with the management, with the internal audit team, getting our SMEs involved from the telecommunications space. For each of the process areas, we nominated process champions to support this exercise. And that's another very important point, right? When you're talking about rolling out a program like this, having just one person who can script an ACL is not going to solve the problem. You would need a team that understands audit, that understands the business, that understands systems, the data structure within those systems, the actual technical requirements of connecting within those systems without impacting the business. And obviously, we were talking about a telecommunications company where billions of call detail records get processed on a real-time basis, right? So we could not afford to do anything that would jeopardize the operational efficiency or the availability of those systems. So all of those aspects are very important. And identifying what sort of analytical rules and techniques would be the appropriate ones to use, whether it's rule-based, whether it's predictive, prescriptive, whether it's diagnostic, whether it's just statistical data that we're trying to look at, what sort of duration is the right duration for us to look at to give accurate outcomes and models. All of those facets get kind of designed here, right? And then the actual implementation of the systems, right? In this particular case, we connected to, 3 or 4 different key systems, right? Obviously, ERP was one of them. There was a central repository for a lot of the customer systems in the data warehouse, but we did connect to several other systems along the way as we did each and every process, right? And then, setting it up, setting the extraction, transformation, and loading of the data, which we call technically ETL, setting up the analytical framework. We used ACL in this case as a base, and then we use other tools like R, etc., on top of it for some of the more advanced analytics. And then the dashboards and the visualizations were done using Tableau, right? So that was the technical backbone of the infrastructure. And one of the most important pieces, if I move along, right, would be setting up the right operating model, the right standard operating procedure. Because what we are trying to do here is changing the very way we actually analyze data in audits, actually look at audit, right? So what happens when you look at the exceptions that come out of the dashboards? Do they become a special report, right? Or do you integrate them as a part of your existing audit plan, right? So these are the questions we had to answer in conjunction with the internal audit team, in conjunction with discussion with the process owners, and so on and so forth, right? So setting up the right team structure and skill set within the internal audit team at STC was the other aspect that we focused on, because it was imperative that this needs to be a sustainable solution. Because as processes change, new data sources get added, KPIs get kind of updated, the internal team had to be sustainable, right? So at no point in time, and this is where I kind of applaud Abdullah's vision as well as perseverance, right, to ensure that uh, we kind of created a structure that was sustainable, and the team was adequately equipped with tools, techniques, proper documentation, proper handholding, knowledge transfer sessions, and even recruitment if need be, to set up this team and structure who would take the CCM journey forward, right? And I'm proud to see what Abdullah and team has been able to do today from the time that we kind of handed the solution over to them. And a lot of credit goes to the team that have taken complete ownership and accountability to use this, make this a success. Because oftentimes organizations look at CCM or analytics as a project that a partner or a consultant will come and do. But unless there is ownership, unless there is plan for sustainability, this is never successful. So that's the continuous improvement in the upkeep. I'll move on to the next slide, which talks a little bit about our joint lessons learned in this journey. And maybe Abdullah, you can start, and I will pitch in.
Yes, in this slide, we have uh, captured the challenges we faced and the lessons learned related to these challenges. First, change management. So implementing CCM is a marathon, not a sprint. The message here is we need to be patient. It's a program, not a one-off project. We need to secure also buy-in from all stakeholders. Actually, I was blessed with full support from the audit committee and executive management for this program, and also the buy-in from my team. So it was a success story. Actually, also the audit committee not only supported, they made it part of my KPIs to implement the CCM and to provide them on quarterly basis a successful implementation for one of the KPIs in the CCM. Second, getting the quality data is difficult, but always shortcuts will lead to garbage in, garbage out. Also, it is essential to develop a sustainable solution that reduce dependency and automate data sourcing with the collaboration of data owners and IT team. So now, whenever we need to get a data, we go to the system, we get a refresh by scripts developed by the IT team that help us and eliminated the dependency on them. The third is having the right operating model, as Emmett said. So what we did, we set up a separate department focusing on CCM, and we have acquired right talents and skilled team. So currently we have a 3 members program manager for CCM with 2 resources working on this project dedicatedly to make sure also this team is self-sustainable, and they are now currently able to generate any ad hoc reports that are required. Fourth, false positives, which we talked about. And also I remember over the project period, the first few rounds of generating reports and exceptions, we got many exceptions, out of which only some were legitimate. I remember, for example, for HR and payroll, the first 6 rounds, we get the data was not accurate, was not complete. So only after the 7th round of getting the data, we were able to generate legitimate exceptions and fully understand the data. So we had to have several meetings with the data owners, with the IT, with the data warehouse to understand the structure of the system, the structure of the data. So what we did here, we worked on increasing the accuracy level by understanding the business process in data. Lastly, it is a continuous improvement process. As of now, there are more than 95 to 97% of exceptions, which are actual exceptions. The 3 to 5% need to be investigated further. However, when we started the project, this percentage was around 70%. The message here, it's a journey. We need to be patient. And in some organizations, after implementing CCM for first time, they will get many exceptions and they will become overwhelmed. They might also lose confidence as some of these exceptions do not make any sense. In the next slide, here we are talking about the benefits realized. So it's all about reducing turnaround and increasing efficiency. So reducing dependency on IT to get the data for other audit operations and not only CCM. Now with the full access to data and direct access to data, we are able to get any data required for any other audit operations, not only for CCM, instead of asking the data and waiting for it. Second, enabling early detection of potential frauds and errors. That helped a lot. Also, capturing trends, which might be a red flag, which need to be investigated. Also, reducing cost and potential loss associated with not addressing the control deficiencies. Expanding internal audit coverage with minimal running cost. And lastly, improving risk and control assurance in less time than traditional internal audit. The last slide here, I'm talking about the value realized. it's not an exhaustive list. We have listed 3 areas as an indicative benefits and values realized of these 3 areas. And we could not share some of the financials information due to confidentiality. In under the customer information assurance, we have the values realized. We capture data quality issues for customer information in CRM, also proactive identifications of missing biometric information or bypassing the policy related to allowable subscription. The general ledger, which helped us a lot, as I mentioned, by material reduction in time and efforts for accounts, trends, and variance, also with the full population coverage of GL analysis. And in procurement, periodic and early detection of any instances of conflict of interest, multiple buying patterns for some items, for the same items identified, which impacted pricing. The last is the mismatches in quantity ordered, bill received, and billed. And I remember after completing the pilot, we did a presentation to procurement VP, and that is part of getting the buy-in and also getting the stakeholders familiarized and getting their support. So the message here is believe in your plan, in your ability, do it in phases as we did. Don't do the big bang. The support from your audit committee and executive management is a key success factor to the success of a CCM implementation. With that, I conclude the presentation.
So thank you, Abdullah. I think we'll open it now for Q&A, and maybe I'll pick up the questions and start kind of moderating. So Abdullah, the first question would be, and it's coming from a head of an internal audit, saying that we would like to make a beginning, but we do not know where to begin, right? And there is obviously a lot of pressure on return on investment versus the program approach that you took. So what would be your advice to the heads of internal audit listening to you today in the region, that if they are convinced to take this journey forward, how do they manage the internal and external expectations? What do they do in order to ensure that this is a success and the program kind of sees the light at the end of the tunnel?
Yes, I would answer that with the 3 steps to be done. First is to select an area, do it in phases, do a pilot. So select could be an area with availability, with a clear availability on data, and the process is matured with a clear policy. Second, secure an infrastructure, and if you don't have the required budget, you could get the help of IT to host the infrastructure for CCM in the beginning till you get the buy-in from executive management or audit committee to have your own dedicated infrastructure. Third, to have a member of your team act as a project manager, temporary, in addition to his roles and responsibilities, because you need to have this team member, because he will be playing a key role to the success of this pilot implementation. And once this pilot implementation is successful, then you can go and keep adding other areas.